Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. Our topic for tonight is Neoliberalism and AI Progress, and this is part 2. Part 1 was last Thursday at this same time, and we spent the hours there going through a very stunning article called Effective Accelerationism and the Pursuit of Cosmic Utopia. And that article was about conflicts within the AI community between the accelerationists and those who oppose them in the search for artificial general intelligence. And what we talked about last week was the developing conflict between a group that in this article is called the effective accelerationists, as distinct from the broader category, of accelerationists. And the people who believe in containing the risk. They are now known as the long-termists. So I'll continue where I left off, last time. The point was made. I'll probably read the last segment here. Let me see where I should take this up again. Let me take it up here. Let me share this article. I'll be repeating a little bit of what I talked about last week, but I think it's important for the flow, of what we're doing here. So the E/ACCs, the effective accelerationists, and the long-termists have a wide range of agreement. They even agree about the importance of mitigating existential risks. Those are events that would prevent us from achieving our, quote, long-term potential, unquote, in the universe, despite differing views about what the existential risk of artificial general intelligence actually is. As the author Verdun says, effective accelerationism aims to minimize existential risk to life itself as a whole, which he contrasts with a more anthropocentric focus of effective acceleration of long-termists. According to Verdon, future life may be entirely technological as opposed to biological, and he seems to think that long-termists are too caught up on preserving humanity in its current form or a modified future form that is still similar to current um, humanity. But this isn't true. The most prominent of the long-termists believe that we should use technology to radically re-engineer humanity, thus creating one or more new, quote, post-human, unquote, species, which might be completely different from the humanity of today. For example, Ord writes that, quote, forever preserving humanity as it now may also squander our legacy, relinquishing the greater part of our potential, unquote. While Bostrom asserts that, quote, again, the permanent foreclosure of any possibility of this kind of transformative change of the human biological nature may itself constitute an existential catastrophe. This is the ideology of transhumanism, the T in the acronym TESCREO, which we talked about last Thursday. And while Verdon and a colleague write that, quote, effective accelerationism has no particular allegiance to the biological substrate for intelligence and life, in contrast to transhumanism, unquote. The fact is that most transhumanists have no allegiance to the biological substrate either. Their aim, subsumed in the long-termist ideology, is to create or become a completely new species, which may be entirely non-biological. There is no bias against becoming post-human beings whose, quote, bodies, unquote, consist of metal, plastic, wires, or computer hardware. Indeed, the long-termist vision is fundamentally about spreading into space, which is likely impossible for wholly biological beings, and simulating vast swarms of digital people. As long as these future beings have moral worth, to hell with the biological, quote, meat sacks, unquote, that we walk around in today. And what is required for moral worth, for something to matter, okay, in an ethical, quote unquote, sense? The most obvious answer is consciousness. If future beings aren't conscious, then they wouldn't really matter, for the same reason that rocks don't really matter. But from the moral point of view, you don't think twice when you kick a rock, because rocks don't feel anything. You would or should think twice about kicking a kitten, because kittens can't feel. The connection between consciousness, okay, and our morality is why Bostrom writes that one type of existential catastrophe would be if, quote, okay, a machine intelligence replaces biological intelligence, but the machines are constructed in such a way that they lack consciousness, unquote. So machines replacing biology would be fine. However, machines without consciousness replacing biology is the problem. For long termists, it is imperative that we, in the words of Elon Musk, unquote, maintain the light of consciousness to make sure it continues into the future. Elon Musk has promoted Bostrom's vision of digital colonization and calls long-termism, quote, a close match for my philosophy, unquote. Similarly, Verdon writes that, quote, E/ACC, which is, of course, an abbreviation for effective accelerationism, is about shining the light of knowledge as bright as possible in order to spread the light of consciousness to the stars, unquote. Nobody seems to have yet considered the possibility that the light of consciousness may already have spread to the stars. Consistent with these aims, long-termists also agree that we should ascend the Kardashev scale. In his book on long-termism and existential risk, quote, at the precipice, unquote, but ORD includes an appendix that proposes extending the Kardashev scale to include a fourth type of technologically advanced civilization, one that harnesses the energy of the entire universe. A global civilization, he writes, currently controls about 12 trillion watts of power. Adding this is about 10,000 times less than the full capacity of our planet, and nowhere near the 4 times 10 to the power 46 watts of power. That's a 4 followed by 46 zeros that a Type 4 civilization would have at its disposal. Harnessing the vast energy by conquering the universe and subjugating the natural world is a key part of fulfilling our long-term potential, quote unquote, in the universe. Leading long-termists would say, in agreement with effective accelerationists like Verdon. And here is a diagram of an artificial general intelligence, or a visualization, I should say. Both sides in the intra-terrestrial AGI debate envision the eventual digitization of consciousness. This image, is from Adobe. So the similarities between effective accelerationism and long-termism are considerable. Both emphasize the importance of being effective, quote unquote, in the pursuit of humanity's ultimate goals. And both describe their position as a kind of altruism, quote unquote. Both aim for a maximally large future population supported by a multi-galactic civilization at the top of the Kardashev scale. Both affirm our obligation to preserve, quote, the light of consciousness, unquote, and both care about existential risks, though they have differing assessments of how risky our current situation is. But in elaborating on this last point, Verdon and a colleague write that the loss of consciousness, quote, in the universe would be the absolute worst outcome, unquote. Effective accelerationists even acknowledge that as technology advances, quote, it becomes easier to extinguish all conscious life in our corner of the universe, unquote. That's exactly what long-termists say, as when Ord asserts there is strong reason to believe the risk will be higher this century and increasing with each century that technological progress continues, unquote. When Bostrom declares that most of the biggest existential risks seem to be linked to potential future technological breakthroughs that may radically expand our ability to manipulate the external world of our own or our own biology, unquote. While Andreessen, who includes E/ACC in his Twitter X bio, lists the idea of existential risk as one of the main enemies, quote unquote, of accelerationism. What he's really saying is that the techno cautious approach to thinking about artificial general intelligence poses an existential risk, quote unquote, to his own accelerationist vision of unconstrained technological progress. Andreessen is no less worried about, quote, existential risks, unquote, than long termists. He just disagrees about what these risks are. For him, quote, decels, DECELS, unquote, pose a much greater risk than artificial general intelligence. Okay, the decels are those who are going to decelerate progress to such a great degree that we fail to realize our potential. Finally, both E/ACC and long-termism are extremely growthist, libertarian, neoliberal, and pro-capitalism. Long-termists just tend to believe that artificial general intelligence constitutes an exception to the rule against state intervention and top-down forms of regulation. This point is worth stressing. Many long-termists oppose regulation by the government, except with respect to artificial general intelligence and other advanced technologies, because they support the regulation of AGI, artificial general intelligence. It might look like they aren't actually libertarian. This is generally not the case. Consider a question that someone recently posted on Twitter/X, quote, is there an, quote, E/ACC for everything but nukes, bioweapons, AI-enabled warfare, and authoritarian surveillance, unquote? One person who responded was Rob Bensinger, an AI doomer who works for the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, founded in 2000 by Yudkowsky, the most famous doomer in the world right now. Last I checked, Bensinger responded, quote, the term for that kind of E/ACC is, quote, the doomer, unquote. In other words, AI doomers are accelerationists about everything except for artificial general intelligence and related technologies. And indeed, doomers like Yudkowsky start out as AI accelerationists, but then they modified their libertarian views to make an exception for artificial general intelligence. When Yudkowsky started the MIRI, which is his institute, it was originally called the Singularity Institute for Artificial Intelligence. And its explicit mission was, quote, to accelerate toward artificial intelligence. exactly what effective accelerationism now wants to do. Emmett Shear, who briefly took the place of Sam Altman, okay, at OpenAI, echoes Benzinger in saying, quote, I'm a doomer, and I'm basically effective accelerationist on literally everything except the attempt to build a human level artificial general intelligence, or AGI. Elsewhere, he writes that, quote, I'm a techno-optimist who also believes that there's a chance that a human level AGI will be catastrophically dangerous, unquote. The differences between A/ACC and effective accelerationist long-termism are therefore relatively small. While E/ACCs like to play up these differences in interviews and blog posts, the two positions occupy nearly the same location on the ideological map, and in practice, their visions of the future are more or less indistinguishable. The philosophy of effective accelerationism also has important connections with other TESCREAL ideologies. In addition to effective accelerationism, long-termism and transhumanism, for example, E/ACCs, are obsessed with what they call the techno-capital singularity, which they define as the asymptotic limit, quote unquote, of, quote, finding, extracting free energy from the universe and converting it to utility at grander and grander scales. The bringing about the techno-capital singularity is essential for realizing the, quote, will of the universe, unquote. The concept of the singularity comes from a version of transhumanism called singularitarianism, the S in, quote, TESCREAL, unquote. There are different definitions of the singularity, but one influential account imagines technological progress accelerating so quickly that it ruptures human history, okay, initiating a new epoch in the cosmos, after which we will colonize space and spread consciousness throughout the Milky Way galaxy and beyond. The universe itself will then begin to, quote, wake up, unquote. An integral part of the singularity on this account is humans merging with our machines, an idea that the E/ACCs also enthusiastically endorse. For example, Verdon describes himself as being bullish about finding ways, quote, finding ways to fund more efforts to facilitate human machine collaboration and augmentation, which he calls, quote, the transhumanist path forward. E/ACC builds upon the singularitarian worldview, adding its own spin on what the coming singularity catalyzed by artificial general intelligence will amount to. There are also notable elements of extropianism in the E/ACC movement. Extropianism, the E in TESCREAL, is a libertarian version of transhumanism that supports free market solutions to all our problems and advocates an alternative to the, quote, precautionary principle called the proactionary principle. This states that when deciding whether to create a new technology, we must consider all the harm that might be caused if we don't create it. Channeling this idea, Andreessen writes in his accelerationist manifesto that, quote, we believe any deceleration of AI will cost lives, deaths that were preventable by the AI that was prevented from existing is a form of murder, unquote. Put differently, if you oppose advanced AI, you're no better than a murderer. In many ways, E/ACC is an updated version of extropianism centered around AGI. Verdon even named his AI company Extropic, quote unquote, borrowing a word popularized 3 decades ago by the extropians. Finally, Verdon also says that E/ACC adds pinches of cosmism to the basic accelerationist framework, unquote. Cosmism, the C in, quote, Tesgrio, unquote, is yet another kind of transhumanism that imagines not only humans building and merging with machines, but spreading into space and literally redesigning entire galaxies through, quote, scientific, quote, future magic, unquote. The grand aspirations of E/ACC are extremely similar to those of cosmism. And in fact, the cosmist named Giulio Prisco recently published an article about E/ACC in which he concludes that extropy, futurism, and cosmism are strongly related in spirit. And I guess that E/ACC is a new instance of that common spirit, unquote. EACC, E/ACC is therefore an extension of extropianism that advocates for the singularity and shares the cosmic dream of controlling the entire universe. Does this mean that, quote, E/ACC, unquote, should be added to the TESCREAL acronym? No, for the same reason that D for Doomer shouldn't be. The Doomers and accelerationists are just variants of the TESCREAL movement. One is techno-cautious about certain advanced technologies like artificial general intelligence, while the other is techno-optimistic. Both are part of the very same hyper-capitalist techno-utopian tradition of thought that has roots in transhumanism and has become pervasive within Silicon Valley over the past 20 years. This is why the quarrels between these camps should be seen as mere family disputes. If only the E/ACCs and the decils, quote unquote, could get over their disagreement about the risks of AGI, artificial general intelligence, they'd be lovers, holding hands, skipping into the utopian sunset, singing songs about conquering the universe and digitizing humanity. In my view, both are equally dangerous in their own ways. While E/ACC seems to have come out ahead following the snafu with OpenAI, let's hope that neither gets to control what our future looks like. Uh, and I guess that's really the point of the whole article about the disagreements among the different factions, okay, in Silicon Valley. Okay, it seems to me on the very center of this very long, okay, and complicated article, okay, is about the point that finally both the accelerationists and long-termism are extremely growthist, also libertarian, also neoliberal, and pro-capitalists. Long-termists just tend to believe that AGI, or artificial general intelligence, constitutes an exception to the rule against state intervention and top-down regulation. In other words, regulation by the government. This last point is worth stressing. Many long-termists oppose regulation by the government, except with respect to artificial general intelligence and other advanced technologies, because they support the regulation of AGI. It might look like they aren't actually libertarian, but this is generally not the case. Both schools, the effective accelerationist school and the long-termist school, are neoliberal, generally pro-capitalism, and detest the idea of state intervention and also of regulation. In doing this, what they're saying is that they're opposed to regulation of their technologies by democracy. Now, of course, they would tell you that with respect to what they do, having a democratic component in the regulation of their technologies would not be democracy, but would be tyranny. But on the other hand, if we believe in democracy and we believe there's a place for regulation by the government, because people ought to have a say in what other people are doing to affect their whole conditions of life, it's obvious that both of these schools are neoliberal in character and are opposed actually to democracy, and of course opposed to socialism. And I think this is the most important lesson of this very, very long article, and about the conflicts in Silicon Valley concerning the direction of artificial intelligence. The elites creating artificial intelligence in Silicon Valley and in other places across the earth are elites that reject the idea that the public purpose should be regulating what they do in terms of innovation. They would probably say that public purpose is too constraining, too focused on the present, not sufficiently open to the future and the possibilities of change. And that furthermore, public purpose, they would say, probably has a bias towards the present and what's good for the present, as opposed to what's good for the future. Well, this may be true, but I dare say that the technologists themselves, when considering the future and considering what the future ought to be like, most probably have a bias themselves towards their own welfare in the here and now, and their own prosperity in the here and now. And they probably have a bias against the prosperity and the well-being in the here and now of the other human beings who might like to have a voice in what they're going to create and what, okay, they are going to do. So the big lesson here is that if we don't want to see our society subjected to existential risks and subjected to arbitrary changes that we have no hands in, we had better regulate, okay, the technologists, both the effective accelerationists and also the long termists, so that they take the public purpose into account in whatever they do and whatever they create, that they take risk into their calculations continuously, and risk as informed by the values inherent in, okay, the public purpose. Because if they don't do that, humanity is going to come out on the short end and may not get to exist much longer uh, um, uh, at all. I think all of us have to keep that in mind, and all of us have to consider the unintended consequences of the innovations that both the effective accelerationists and the long termists would like to impose upon, okay, the rest of us. So that's the lesson. I hope you appreciated, okay, that lesson. It will come up, I'm sure, in other articles about what's going on, okay, with AI that we will be dealing with in the future as we go forward. The idea of neoliberalism and AI progress and how they relate is going to become increasingly important over a period of time, okay, I believe. I have two other pieces tonight that deal with some of the issues that are pointed up in this article, which I think is a very great article, by the way, very important article, and it was why I considered it here. First, there's a piece from Futurism, which I would like you to take a look at. I stopped sharing an ad. This piece was written on January 4th by Victor Tangerman, Tangerman actually, M-A-N-N. Okay, in the category of artificial intelligence. It comes from The Byte, which is a well-known technological publication. And the title is Scientists Say This is the probability artificial intelligence will drive humans extinct. Is that a lot? What that is, we will get to in just a minute. This is evidence from a new survey that took into account the input from 2,778 researchers. There's a not insignificant risk of artificial intelligence triggering human extinction. That's before we can get to all of the digital consciousnesses they were talking about. Okay, and also before we really get to the age of what we might call the cybernauts. Just over half of the AI researchers surveyed say there's a 5% chance that humans will be driven to extinction, among other, quote, extremely bad outcomes. but 5% of that extremely bad outcome. So let's see what the people who took this survey have to say, rather collectively. And there's an ad, of course, for Nikki Haley, the rising star, okay, of a Republican, so I think is considered very intelligent, okay, by many people. But of course, the comments that she makes to many of us appear vastly moronic. But going on with this piece, the average respondent, for instance, estimated a 10% chance that uh, um, machines could outperform humans in, quote, every possible task, unquote, by 2027, and a 50% chance that they do so by 2047. That's an interesting finding because I think it implies that the AIs will have consciousness but by that time, because I think certain tasks that we humans do involve actual consciousness. Okay, but let us see. But it's not all doom and gloom. 68.3% of respondents said that, quote, good outcomes come from superhuman artificial intelligence, unquote, are more likely, okay, than bad ones. Well, more likely is that 51 to 49%, 69 to 31%. How much more likely? Okay, because, of course, let's consider for a minute the risk of extinction, people think, is actually 5%. Well, there are two components, okay, to the concept, okay, of risk. There are also different ways to construe risk, but still there are two components. Two components, okay, a probability times the cost, okay, of negative outcomes. So the probability of extinction is 5%. But what cost would you place on the extinction, okay, of the human race? If the probability of extinction is 5%, what is the cost of that event, okay, actually occurring from a human value point of view? The cost is absolutely astronomical. So then the question arises, should we be taking that risk? Because if the cost, okay, is astronomical and the probability is 5%, then 5% times astronomical is a very, very, very big number. Consider the following. What if your concept of risk is the likelihood, okay, of an event, not the probability now, but the likelihood of an event times the cost, okay, of that event? Very often we find in science that the likelihood of something happening is much greater than the probability, okay, of its happening. For example, if you try to compute the likelihood of life, in the universe based on certain assumptions. It would probably be the case that the probability of life, the chance of life occurring in any given situation, would be very, very, very low. On the other hand, given certain conditions that exist, in the universe, it may be that the likelihood of life in the universe, of life occurring somewhere, in the universe, may be very, very, very high. So likelihood and probability are not, the same thing. So turning that thought, to the idea, of the likelihood of extinction if we pursue artificial intelligence, that likelihood that somewhere, at some time, the artificial intelligences will create may simply run away with the universe, uh, and create an extinction event for the human intelligences that create them. That particular likelihood may be much, much greater than the 5%, that we've been talking about. And again, if the negative value involved in the extension of humans seems to us to be astronomical, uh, we have a situation where the risk would be computed as much, much higher than it would be if we took a probability of 5% and we multiplied it by, the notion of an astronomical cost. If we get to situations where one believes that good outcomes from superhuman AI are more likely than bad ones, it's a real issue as to whether the good outcomes that are more likely outweigh the bad outcomes, that are less likely. The good outcomes might be very, very good, but they might not stack up against the likelihood, of extinction. Going forward, most of all, the survey highlights the sheer amount of disagreement and uncertainty among researchers, with broad disagreement about whether progress uh, should be sped up or slowed down. The next section is numbers game. The 5% figure is nonetheless telling, noting a significant perceived danger. I agree. It's telling. Quote, it's an important signal that most AI researchers don't find it strongly implausible that advanced AI destroys humanity. Author Katja Grace at the Machine Intelligence Research Institute in California said to New Scientist, quote, I think this general belief in a non-minuscule risk is much more telling than the exact percentage risk, unquote. As the survey notes, forecasting is difficult in general, and subject matter experts have been observed to perform poorly, unquote. True words were never spoken. Quote, Our participants' expertise, is in AI, and they do not, to our knowledge, have any unusual skill at forecasting in general, unquote, the paper continues. That doesn't mean their word should be discredited. Quote, while unreliable, educated guesses are what we must all rely on, and theirs are informed by expertise in the relevant field, the researchers write. Quote, these forecasts should be part of a broader set of evidence from sources such as trends in computer hardware advancements in AI capabilities, economic analyses, and insights from forecasting experts. In the short term, instead of expecting a dystopian extinction event triggered by a malicious artificial intelligence, the vast majority of AI researchers surveyed warned about deep fakes, the manipulation of public opinion, the creation of dangerous viruses, or AI systems that allow individuals to prosper, some individuals to prosper, at the expense, of others. Forgive me, if I think that we're very much in danger of the creation of dangerous viruses or systems that allow individuals to prosper at the expense of others, because that's where our motivation as a species seems to be. And given the upcoming U.S. presidential election, all eyes will be on AI and its unnerving capability to distort the truth in a believable way. So I thought that was a very interesting article, which emphasized the risk aspect, of AI, and suggests we ought to be very, very active in regulating the people who are developing artificial, intelligence. As you can already tell, I am very much on, the regulation side. So let me get to the last piece for tonight. I think that's quite an interesting piece, the last piece, that is, as well, because it talks about something that we haven't said anything about yet. So this is from Common Dreams, and here is Ro Khanna. You should be seeing Ro in your stream, at this point. There he is. No, D tonight. I think D got caught up in talking about the issue of the day, of course, which is the prosecution of Israel, in the World Court. I was part of her discussion earlier, at 8 o'clock. And of course, we had a lot of interesting things to say about the first day, of the proceedings. All three of us had watched at least some of the proceedings today, and we're in a position, to evaluate those. But let me go on with the Ro Khanna piece here from Common Dreams. Headline is Khanna, Rise of AI Must Center, quote, on dignity and economic security of working class, unquote. Quote, the Democratic Party cannot claim to be a party of the working class if we allow AI to erode the earnings and security of the working class, unquote. So Roe is calling attention to an important dimension of the public purpose as we now see it. An important value, very important value, the dignity and economic security, of the working class. This article is by Jessica Corbett. It appeared on January 4th of 2024, so I've been holding on to it for a week to use here. Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna, whose California district includes Silicon Valley, warned Thursday that to avoid catastrophic impacts of the artificial intelligence revolution, lawmakers and regulators must learn from, quote, how unfettered globalization hollowed out the working class, unquote, in the United States, leaving, quote, shuttered factories and rural communities that never saw the promised jobs actually materialize, unquote. Quote, like globalization, AI will undoubtedly bring benefits, tremendous benefits to our economy, with higher productivity, personalized medicine and education, and more efficient energy use, unquote. The congressman wrote in a New York Times opinion piece, quote, generative AI has the potential to help those with fewer resources or experience quickly learn and develop new skills, unquote. He noted, quote, the real challenge, though, is how to center the dignity and economic security of working class Americans during the changes to come. And unlike the Industrial Revolution, which spanned half a century at least, the AI revolution is unfolding at lightning speed. I don't know if I would agree with that. I was very involved in researching AI during the 1990s and the early 2000s, and I knew a good deal about it. It was a somewhat superficial knowledge. I wasn't doing AI every day, but I was paying attention to its development within the field, of knowledge management. I read a lot of articles on it. I read a lot of the theory. Uh, I was very interested, in the use of AI, in learning applications. Uh, it doesn't seem to me it's developed at lightning speed since the 1990s. There were lots of things we envisioned then, and imagined then that did not come to pass because some of the problems of AI, including the problems of creating, okay, uh, an artificial general intelligence, have proved to be more stubborn than we thought that they would be then. Of course, AI today is much further advanced than we were uh, during the 1990s. But still, short of actually inventing an artificial general, intelligence. So I don't know that I'd agree that things are unfolding at lightning speed, but they may seem so to Ro Khanna. Khanna stressed that, quote, today the Democratic Party is at a crossroads as it was in the 1990s, when the dominant wing of the party argued for prioritizing private sector growth and letting the chips fall where they may. That, of course, was when the dominant wing of the party went over to neoliberalism. Of course, the Republicans had gone over to neoliberalism in the 1980s, perhaps even before that, ignoring prescient criticism from former Democratic Senators Paul Wellstone, whose untimely death in a plane crash, and I believe it was I forget, I think it was in 2004, but that was a real loss to our country because Paul Wellstone was a very passionately moral individual. Okay, he came out of SDS, okay, in the 1960s. His understanding of economics was quite imperfect. He was an extremely progressive person who was also a balanced budget type of person. He didn't understand public finance at all, but he had a real conscience. Anyway, and Russ Feingold, okay, another person, okay, who had a real conscience, who fought against the role of big money in politics, and who was defeated by big money, as well as independent Senator Bernie Sanders, who then served, okay, in the House, and whose career, of course, we're very familiar with, okay, today, and whose failings we are very familiar with as well. After failing to heed their warnings, he argued, quote, Democratic Party cannot claim to be the party of the working class if we allow AI to erode the earnings and security of the working class. I don't think the Democratic Party can claim to be the party of the working class now. But yeah, it's important, okay, to not allow artificial intelligence to erode the earnings and security of the working class any further. The party can be forgiven once for the mistake of abetting globalization to run amok, just not twice, unquote. Technologies, our technologies are meant to complement and enhance human initiative, not subordinate or exploit it, he asserted. Quote, we must push for workers to have a decision-making role in how and when to adopt technologies. And we must insist on workers profiting from the implementation of these technologies. Our generational task is to ensure that AI is a tool for lessening the vast disparities of wealth and opportunity plague us, not, okay, exacerbating them, unquote. I think that's a very timely warning, okay, from Rilkanen. And it surely illustrates one dimension of the idea that AI must serve the public purpose, and in particular, this particular dimension of the public purpose. But there are other dimensions of the public purpose too that must be served, not simply the dimension of enhancing equality. Enhancing equality is enormously important. Safeguarding the economic security of workers is enormously important. But it's also very important that AI fuel the transition to a green, okay, economy and help us to manage the climate change. It's very important also, okay, that AI it contributes to the goal of the success of a Medicare for All program that is still to be passed, and it is so important for the security of all, okay, of our population. There are all kinds of social goals, okay, that AI can prove, okay, to be, okay, of benefit to. But it's up to all of us to see that the regulation of AI influences heavily the direction in which AI develops. It has to develop with a purpose, and that purpose has to be in accord with our values. Going forward with the article, underscoring the urgency of his message, Connor pointed out that in September, quote, tech's biggest names trekked to Capitol Hill for a forum on artificial intelligence, unquote. That, quote, was reminiscent of Davos conferences in the 1990s and early 2000s. And this year alone, tens of thousands of workers at hundreds of companies could be laid off and replaced, with AI. And here's a quote, here's a tweet from Bud Shenkin. Important column on correcting the faults of the New Dems of the 1990s, the neolibs' faith in the unfettered market. And of course, we've seen, in the first article that we read both last week and for part, of this week, that the AI developers are neolibers, are neolibs themselves. And they have a faith, in the unfettered market. And based on the performance of the unfettered market in the past, we should see to it that their market for AI is heavily regulated rather than, an unfettered market. Going on, already AI is factoring into labor negotiations and legislative battles. After California legislators last year overwhelmingly approved Assembly Bill 316, which would have required a human driver on self-driving trucks weighing over 10,000 pounds that are transporting goods or passengers for at least 5 years. However, Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom vetoed it. I have to point out here that if Joe Biden finally decides to step down and not run for the presidency of the United States this year, chances are very good that the Democratic National Committee will turn to Gavin Newsom to run for the presidency of the United States. And so we already know where he stands when it comes to requiring a human driver for self-driving trucks. Quote, tech companies argue that replacing human drivers with AI is feasible, will reduce labor costs, and will therefore make it cheaper to transport goods and services. They lobbied heavily against the bill, explained Rokana. Quote, I support AB 316, that's Assembly Bill 316, because drivers say it's currently an unnecessary risk to have large trucks on public roads without a human on board. This is especially true if there is extreme weather, hazardous conditions, or heavy cargo on board. No one understands the safety risks at play here better than the drivers themselves, and it's both foolish and insulting to suggest they would make up such concerns to keep jobs that do not add a value. Quote, it is not just the AI concerns of truck drivers that are causing divides in the Democratic coalition, the congressman continued, highlighting that the months-long strikes of unionized writers and actors in Hollywood last year ended with deals that included provisions about artificial intelligence. The California Democrat who joined striking writers on the picket line wrote that even though writers' jobs are very different from truck drivers' jobs, Labor solidarity is one of the few countervailing forces that can blunt the dehumanization of work that's motivated by short-term profit maximization in a world where AI is capable of suddenly disrupting both blue and white collar work. When it comes to writers' jobs and writing, consciousness is terribly important, from the innovation point of view and the creativity point of view. I don't think that AIs can replace humans yet. When it comes to creativity, I know I would get a lot of pushback from AI researchers, especially those in generative AI, about this particular opinion of mine. Going on, Khanna, author of the 2022 book, Dignity in a Digital Age, Making Tech Work for All of Us, published the Times piece amid fears about how AI will impact everything from mass surveillance and misinformation to healthcare and war, not only in the United States, but around the world. His Thursday column won praise, from progressives across the country. Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher, head of the California Labor Federation, said that his piece is, quote, truly a must-read for any policymaker, while Katrina vanden Heuvel, the Nation's editorial director and publisher, called it an, quote, important read and issue for now and in 28, unquote. There are, incidentally, some people who are looking to Ro Khanna as a presidential candidate for 1928. He's in many ways a very attractive candidate, certainly in the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party, if there is such a wing, but also someone who's been careful to become reasonably acceptable to the establishment. So I ought to make that clear. This article was written by Jessica Corbett. I don't know if I mentioned that, from Common Dreams. It was written on January 4th. So, Ro Khanna in that article brings home, the lesson that we have to look to the regulation, of AI. There will be great opposition to that from Silicon Valley, and there will be arguments such as, well, the Chinese are making great advances, in AI, and we have to assure that we can make the great advances too, and we can't allow government regulation to impede, our innovation in the AI field. The answer to that for everybody, we're certainly going to hear that argument, is to point out that the Chinese researchers, in the AI area, are not in an unfettered kind of market-based type of environment. They are being regulated by the government according to the government's perception, of the public purpose. I mean, the Chinese leadership has a definite perception of the various dimensions of the public purpose in China. And they legislate and they govern far more according to the public purpose than our market oriented elites do here. We're watching it, we're seeing it as we see how rapidly China is developing and what great progress they're making in lifting people out of poverty and creating a much more equal society than we have. So, uh, yes, we're competing with China in the area of AI, and they are making great strides in the AI area. But the success that they're having is certainly partly due to the role that public purpose has in regulating AI in China. And I argue that if we want to compete with them, we had better make sure that AI is, we had better make sure that AI is developed in accordance with the public purpose here as well. So, after the hellos, we have Jeffrey Denton saying, wow. Steve says, finally, Doc is addressing my favorite subject. Well, thank you, Steve. I told you I would get to it eventually. I have actually considerable background, in AI, so I was bound to get to it sooner or later. By the way, the topic for tonight, I had to go into too many details, for the main articles, but the risks that are posed, in AI brings me to an area which I've really done a lot of work and which I'm an expert, I believe, to the extent anybody is an expert in it. And that area is the extent to which values enter scientific endeavor. The dimension of cost as it should appear in scientific research. Sometime in the future, I don't know exactly when, I will do a Neoliberalism in AI Progress Part 3, where I present my overall view. Well, maybe I won't even put it in terms of AI, but maybe I'll put it in terms of neoliberalism and progress in science. So I have very definite ideas of the way science as a whole and AI in particular should be developed over a period of time so as to take values and value theory into account. Robert Combs says, anybody watch the show Ancient Aliens? I've watched that show from time to time. It's quite interesting, I think. A lot of speculation, of course. Andy Candy, hey Joe, just ducking in for a jiffy. Doesn't all the transhumanism and techno-utopian and related movements are just going to pollute the cosmos like we're ruining our atmosphere? I like to think, Andy, that when we get out into the cosmos, we'll find many other intelligent beings there, and that they won't allow us to pollute the cosmos like we've been ruining our own atmosphere, and stratosphere. Whatever the right term is, talking about the right term for techno-utopianism. I don't know what the right term is. I don't think that's been invented yet. Kay says, no, Robert. Steve says, hi, Robert. Andy Ken says, dear Lord, not only do we have to fight against oppressive capitalism, now we have to rage against the machine too. Kay says, yes, Andy. Hello, Andy. Andy says, hey, guys. Got both twins tonight. All three of us are having gum problems. Call us the Gummy Three. Oh, well, maybe you need. Okay, I don't mean to joke about this. This is not just a joke, but maybe some CBD gummies, okay, can help all of you. And Steve Wolfbrand says, watch Dr. Campbell video about 100% brain virus in mice, okay, with human DNA. Yeah, I saw that show today, Steve. Uh, okay, to make it clear, there was a brain virus which was evidently developed, okay, in the laboratory. It was tested, okay, on mice that had some DNA from humans. In other words, on laboratory mice. And what the 100% is about is that the brain virus had a fatality rate of 100% when given to these mice. Not one survived. And of course, there's the great fear that somehow this brain virus is going to get loose, among by human beings, and will wipe us all out. That's of course the immediate sort of thought. In my conception of science, of what science ought to be like, that brain virus would never have been developed in the first place. Steve says, or biolabs. Maybe we don't deserve this planet. I think to some degree, Steve, that's still to be determined. Okay, but I do agree. Whether or not we deserve this planet is a very pregnant issue at this point and has been for a very long time. Andy Candy says, hell, isn't the climate emergency already a risk to our extinction? We won't have a chance to worry about another event. Yes, I agree, Andy. Of course. Artificial intelligence is going to kill our independent thought tweaking. Well, that's why we have to regulate it. We have to regulate it in such a way that it's going to help our independent thought tweaking. Andy says, slow that shit down. We got to stop the climate emergency tonight. Kay says, no D tonight. Well, I guess not. I left her the link, to the show. But, of course, she was focusing on what went on, what went on in the World Court, today. So the discussion on that stream was very, very active and probably kept going for a long time. And as far as I know, they might still be having it even now as we're finishing up here. Robert says, well, I have to leave to attend a meeting on Zoom. We'll be back next week. Thank you, Robert. A lot of Zoom meetings these days. Kay says, bye, Robert. Steve says, I have to go to bed. Good night, everybody. Good night, Steve. Jeffrey Denton says, I'm pretty sure real AI would be able to hold a conversation with a person, and he'll be able to ask questions. And none of us are allowed to question anything about anything. Good point, Jeff Denton. Kay says, night, Steve. Kay says, okay, guys, I'm out of here. I love you all. Steve Wolfbrand says, good night, Kay. Steve was still here, 10:14. Andy says, right term for protective cosmos around this planet. Andy says, great idea about the gummies. If it contains THC, though, It'll give me fibromyalgia. I'm talking about CBD gummies, Andy. Uh, they don't contain any THC. I'm not sure they'll help, but they might well help with the pain. They're really good for that. So, on that note, I'm going to say goodnight. I'll be back tomorrow with the Dump the Corruption show. Uh, uh, let me give you more of a forecast than that about tomorrow night. Okay, we'll be talking some more about what's likely to happen in the Supreme Court, the issue with the Supreme Court, okay, and Donald Trump, Colorado, and those things. And another very good article from Slate, which is doing excellent coverage, okay, in this area. We're also going to discuss uh, what kinds of money the congressional backers of the Gaza war received from the most pro Israel donors. So that's going to be very interesting from the dump the corruption point of view. And before I'm through, there may be one or two other articles that will be covered tomorrow night, okay, as well. So I hope you will all come by. Uh, Tell Dee I felt energy that she sent, and my gum felt better for a while. I need to kill the infection, though. Okay, Andy, I'll tell her, but I suspect you may be able to tell her tomorrow night, okay, yourself. But we'll see. Okay, we'll see what happens. So until tomorrow night, okay, good night. Uh, and again, I'll see you tomorrow.